The wind howled through the cracked ancient stone of the convent, whispering secrets no one had heard in decades. It carried with it the scent of old incense, the faintest trace of a memory long since forgotten. The world outside had changed, but the convent, with its cold stone walls and darkened corners, remained as it always had, a relic of a bygone time, a place where time had stopped. In the winter of 1998, the convent became the scene of a mystery that would never truly be solved. Sister Mary Magdalene, a quiet, pious woman who had devoted her life to God and to the service of others, vanished without a trace. It wasn't a grand disappearance. No alarms were raised. No one knew exactly when it happened. But when the nuns awoke the next morning to begin their daily prayers, there was no sign of her. Her bed was undisturbed, as though she had never slept in it. Her shoes, neatly placed beside her bed the night before, were gone, as was the small crucifix she always wore around her neck. The room was locked from the inside, but there was no sign of a struggle, just silence, and the air, thick with the kind of eerie stillness that only comes when someone has been taken. The nuns gathered in the chapel, praying fervently for Sister Mary Magdalene's return. They thought she might have gone for a walk in the cold, gone to find solace in the garden. They believed, as they had for many years, that the convent was a safe place, a sanctuary from the outside world, a place where nothing bad could ever happen. But days passed. No word, no sign. Not even a footprint leading away from the convent. The search parties combed the surrounding forests and hills, but the only thing they found was a single snow-covered bench under the large oak tree near the convent cemetery. No tracks. Leading to it, just the lingering scent of old wood and a faint breeze that carried with it the echo of something unseen. Weeks turned into months and months into years. The police stopped searching. The nuns, though heartbroken, eventually came to accept that Sister Mary Magdalene was gone. But the convent, the old building that had stood for centuries, had other plans. The whispers began not long after. The nuns, now fewer in number, spoke in hushed tones about strange sounds in the night. Doors that would open by themselves, a soft, almost imperceptible knock on the walls. The rumors spread, each story more terrifying than the last. Sister Mary Magdalene hadn't simply disappeared, they said. She had been taken by something or someone, and the convent, in some way, had become her prison. Some of the remaining sisters, shaken by the strange occurrences, left for other convents. One by one, the Sisters of St. Jude's Asylum left the convent until only a handful remained. The place, once bustling with the sound of prayer and laughter, grew silent. The laughter faded, the prayers stopped. The old stone walls crumbled beneath the weight of years and memories, leaving behind only ghosts. It was then that the convent was abandoned. The sisters moved on, their faith too shaken to remain. The convent, with its decaying walls and ancient halls, stood alone in the wilderness, forgotten by time, hidden from the world that had moved on. But not all had forgotten. In the silence that followed, the convent remained untouched for years. It stood like a tomb in the midst of the woods, its cracked walls bearing the weight of its own secrets. The world outside continued to spin, but within those ancient walls, time had ceased. Then, 25 years later, a new chapter in the convent's long and troubled history began. Lucas, a young man with no knowledge of the convent's grim past, was hired to restore it. The building was being prepared for sale, and the company he worked for had been tasked with clearing out the debris and securing the structure. But what he found when he walked through the creaking, rotting doors was nothing like he had expected. The air in the convent was always cold, even in the summer. A strange, damp chill that clung to the stone walls, never quite dissipating no matter how high the sun climbed in the sky. And in the midst of the decay, Lucas began to feel it. The presence. It was subtle at first, barely noticeable, a flicker of shadow in the corner of his eye, the briefest impression of a movement just beyond his sight. As he ventured deeper into the convent, the silence pressed in on him like a weight. The rooms were dark, the walls lined with peeling wallpaper and broken furniture, all wrapped in a thick layer of dust. It was as though no one had stepped foot in the place in years. But something was wrong. He could feel it, Something had happened here, something dark and unresolved. It wasn't until he reached the west wing, the part of the convent the nuns had kept locked, that he began to understand. The temperature dropped, the hairs on his arms stood on end, and a sense of dread washed over him. There, buried beneath layers of old plaster and timber, was a door, hidden, locked away for reasons Lucas could not yet understand. But as he stood there, staring at the door, he knew he had to open it. With a hammer and chisel, he began to chip away at the wall. The sound of the metal scraping against the stone echoed in the silence, filling the air with a strange, ominous rhythm. And as the wall began to give way, the room behind it revealed itself, dark, ancient, and filled with a cold that seemed to seep into his very bones. Lucas reached for the door handle, his fingers trembling. He turned it, the old metal creaking in protest, and stepped inside. Lucas hesitated for a moment, standing at the threshold of the hidden room. The door, long forgotten by time, had yielded to his persistence, but beyond it lay an overwhelming silence. It felt as though the very air had been trapped there for years, held captive by the crumbling walls and the weight of untold stories. The darkness within the room seemed to shift as he stepped inside, as though it were alive, watching him, waiting for something. His flashlight barely cut through the blackness, the beam weak against the heavy shadows. Dust motes danced lazily in the air, disturbed by his movement. As his shoes scraped against the cold stone floor, the sound echoed through the room with an eerie precision, amplifying his sense of isolation. The walls, lined with ancient shelves and forgotten relics, appeared to shrink in on him. The temperature had dropped, the coolness now seeping into his skin, creeping under his clothes, chilling him from the inside out. Every instinct in his body told him to turn back, but something deeper than curiosity, pulled him further into the room. He felt it before he saw it. A presence. It wasn't the usual sensation of unease one gets when walking through an old, abandoned building. No, this was different. It was as though the room itself was aware of his intrusion, as if it had been waiting for him. Lucas wasn't sure if he was imagining it, but he swore he could hear faint whispers in the distance, like the rustling of pages turning. His breath hitched as he paused, the silence pressing against him, suffocating him. His heart began to race, thudding loudly in his chest, louder than any sound in the room. It felt as if the very walls were closing in on him. A shiver ran down his spine, and for the first time, he wondered if the old stories, the rumors that had been whispered about the convent, were true, about the nun who had vanished all those years ago, about the strange occurrences that followed. Had the presence of Sister Mary Magdalene, her spirit, lingered in the convent, trapped in this very room, or was it something else? Something darker? His flashlight flickered, casting erratic shadows that seemed to mock him. He reached for the small metal lantern he had brought with him, the flame weak but steady, offering little comfort. The flickering light revealed an altar in the far corner of the room, covered in layers of dust and cobwebs. The altar was simple, nothing like the ornate ones in the chapel, but there was something undeniably sacred about it, something that drew him closer. He took a tentative step forward, his footsteps echoing louder now in the quiet, unsettling room. His heart seemed to beat faster as he approached the altar. On it there was a small weathered box. The box was simple in appearance, plain even, but Lucas felt an inexplicable pull towards it. His hands shook as he reached for it, the box cold and heavy in his grip. As his fingers brushed the lid, an unsettling chill swept over him. He could feel the weight of the room shift. The air seemed to thicken, almost as if it were holding its breath. With a deep breath, Lucas opened the box. Inside, there were faded pieces of paper, old journals, crumpled and worn with time. He carefully lifted them, his fingers brushing against the fragile pages. The handwriting was nearly illegible, scrawled with trembling urgency. But amidst the disarray, a few words stood out, written in a dark, hurried script. "I have seen the darkness that hides beneath the surface. The truth is not as simple as we thought. It is here, in the silence, where it waits." Lucas's stomach twisted. His pulse quickened as his eyes scanned the next few lines. The words seemed to swirl in his mind, haunting him even as he read them. He couldn't explain why, but he felt a connection to the words, as if they were meant for him. His fingers brushed against the old pages, tracing the words in disbelief. He felt it again, something pulling him deeper, urging him to understand. But as his mind raced to piece together the fragmented message, he was struck by an overpowering sensation. It was a feeling of being watched, of something unseen hovering just behind him, breathing down his neck. A distant sound echoed through the room, a whisper, soft at first, then louder, clearer. It was a voice barely audible, but unmistakable in its urgency. "Leave this place, and leave now." Lucas spun around, his flashlight trembling in his grip. His eyes searched the room frantically, but there was nothing, no one. The silence returned, thick and suffocating. His chest tightened, his breath shallow. Was it the wind, or had he truly heard something? His mind raced, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something beyond his understanding was at play here. Something ancient, something dark. He snapped the journal shut, his heart pounding in his chest. The presence in the room was growing stronger, the air thick with an invisible weight. Lucas turned toward the door, but before he could take a step, something stopped him. A soft creak. He turned back, but the room was as still as it had been when he entered. The walls, the altar, the old worn box, it all seemed so ordinary. And yet there was nothing ordinary about the chill creeping into his bones, or the sense that he was not alone. "What have I awakened?" he whispered to himself. But the question felt hollow, as though the answer had already been written long before he ever set foot in this forsaken place. The room felt suffocating, heavy with the weight of secrets, buried deep within its walls. Lucas stood frozen, staring at the journal in his hands as the sensation of being watched pressed against him from all sides. He had no words, no explanation for what he had just felt. The whisper, the sudden drop in temperature, the overwhelming presence that seemed to have manifested out of nowhere. But as he stood there, a strange thought crossed his mind. He wasn't alone. Not in this room, not in this place. There was something or someone that had been here long before him. His fingers trembled as he thumbed through the pages of the journal, each one more faded and fragile than the last. The ink had bled with time, but the words, scratched out in hurried, trembling script, were clear enough, as if they were calling to him, urging him to understand. The bells tolled and the silence broke. I heard her voice, but it wasn't Mary Magdalene. It was something else, something old. Lucas read the words again, his brow furrowing. It sounded almost like a confession, a desperate cry for help. The name Mary Magdalene sent a shiver down his spine. Could this be the same Sister Mary Magdalene who had vanished all those years ago? The one the other nuns had whispered about in fear? The one who had seemingly disappeared into thin air? The more he read, the more he realized that the journal wasn't just a record of events. It was a warning that something dark had been unleashed here, something that couldn't be undone. His heart pounded as he turned to the next page, desperate to uncover more of the story. "I've seen it now. The thing in the shadows, it knows me. It calls to me in the silence of the night, its whispers growing louder each day. The others, they think I am losing my mind, but I know the truth. I have seen the darkness." The words were growing more frantic, more desperate, but the handwriting was still legible, still revealing a story that Lucas couldn't quite understand. The strange sensation of dread that had gripped him earlier intensified as he read on, as if the very act of uncovering this journal was triggering something that had been dormant for years. A loud, sudden noise echoed from the far side of the room, causing Lucas to jump. His pulse quickened and his head snapped in the direction of the sound. The dust particles in the air seemed to dance in the flickering light of his lantern, casting long shadows across the stone walls. But there was nothing, just emptiness. His breathing quickened, the weight of the silence settling around him like a heavy shroud. He felt cold, colder than before, and it wasn't just the temperature of the room. It was as though the room itself had become a living entity, pressing in on him from all sides. He forced himself to focus, his eyes returning to the journal. The words before him were becoming harder to read, the ink now so faint that it seemed to dissolve into the page. And then, as he reached for the next page, something caught his eye. A symbol. A faint, circular design etched into the bottom of the page, drawn with a steady, deliberate hand. It was a symbol he had seen before, but where? It was hauntingly familiar, like a puzzle piece that had been missing for years. Lucas's mind raced as he flipped back through the journal, his fingers scanning each page in search of another clue. And there it was again. A symbol, faint but unmistakable, hidden within the text. The same symbol that had appeared on the pages of the convent's ancient records that had been locked away for decades. It was an emblem of some kind, ancient and forgotten, its meaning long since obscured by time. But Lucas felt it. He felt it deep within him, the connection. This symbol was no accident. It was a key, and somehow he was on the verge of unlocking its secret. The journal's final entry was written in a frantic hand, the ink smudged, as if the writer had been in a rush, or perhaps in fear. It is coming for me. I can feel it. Lurking in the walls, I cannot escape. It knows I am here, I am the last one left, and it will take me too. If you find this, you must leave. Leave now before it takes you as well. The finality of the words hit Lucas like a punch to the gut. He could feel his heart racing in his chest, the room growing colder with each passing second. The last sentence hung in the air, as though the words themselves were alive, wrapping themselves around him, tightening their grip. Suddenly, the air felt thicker, the silence more oppressive. The journal slipped from his hands, falling to the floor with a soft thud. And then, just as suddenly, everything fell silent. But the silence was different now. It was a heavy silence. A silence that pressed in on him from all sides, suffocating him. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to move, and the temperature continued to drop, the cold settling deep in his bones. Lucas glanced around, his mind racing. What had he uncovered? And what was this darkness that the journal spoke? For he didn't know, but as he looked at the faded pages, he realized he was no longer just a witness to the story. He was part of it. The whispers returned, faint but growing louder. This time they weren't just in the room with him. They were in his mind, weaving in and out of his thoughts. They were calling to him. Leave, leave now. The whispers refused to leave Lucas. They clung to his thoughts like a heavy fog, seeping into his mind, tugging at the edges of his sanity. Every step he took in the ancient, decaying convent seemed to draw him deeper into the mystery, deeper into something he wasn't sure he could escape. He stood in the dim light of the room, his heart pounding in his chest, sweat beading on his forehead. His fingers trembled as they gripped the lantern, the flickering light casting long, distorted shadows across the stone walls. The journal, now discarded on the floor, seemed to pulse with an energy of its own. Its words burned into his mind, the images of the symbols and desperate pleas flashing behind his eyelids, a constant reminder of the darkness he had uncovered. He needed to leave. He knew that. Every fiber of his being screamed for him to run from the building, run from whatever had been awakened by his presence. But he couldn't. Something kept him rooted to the spot. It wasn't curiosity anymore. It was something darker, something more primal. The old convent was no longer a place of refuge or history. It was a living thing, a place that had absorbed years of fear, grief, and secrets. And now it had taken him in. There was no turning back. With a shudder, Lucas forced himself to step away from the altar, the heavy silence pressing in on him. The air had grown colder, heavier, and as he moved through the room, the temperature seemed to drop even further. It was as if the walls themselves were drawing in the warmth, suffocating him with their oppressive weight. His mind raced, but there was a part of him that still couldn't shake the feeling, the sensation that something or someone was watching him. His gaze flicked toward the far corner of the room, where the shadows seemed to shift as though they were alive. He was certain he had seen movement in that corner, just a flicker, a shadow that didn't quite belong. But when he looked again, the corner was empty, the darkness impenetrable. He swallowed hard and forced himself to turn away, moving slowly toward the far side of the room. Each step felt like it was being watched, the silence pressing in on him like an unseen hand. The floor creaked beneath his weight, and the air smelled of mildew and something else, something faintly metallic like blood. Then suddenly he felt it, a cold draft rushing past him. It came from the direction of the far wall, from behind a broken wooden panel that had been shoved to the side. The draft was ice cold, sending a shiver up his spine, and it carried with it the faintest trace of something he couldn't place, but it felt ancient, unnatural. Without thinking, Lucas moved toward the wall. The air felt denser, here the chill more pronounced. His breath came in visible puffs as he reached out to touch the cracked panel. It was cold to the touch, colder than the surrounding walls, as though something had been hidden behind it for years. Something, waiting. His fingers brushed against the wood, and the unmistakable sound of something scraping against the wall echoed in the silence. Lucas's heart skipped a beat. The sensation was like a jolt of electricity running through his veins. Something shifted. Behind the wall, he couldn't see it, but he could feel it. A presence. The unmistakable feeling of being watched. The cold grew more intense, pressing in on him, his body shuddering with a sudden, unnatural chill. He could hear the distant sound of breathing, slow and deliberate, like the exhale of someone or something waiting just beyond the wall. Without thinking, Lucas reached for the panel, his hands trembling, his mind urging him to stop. But the pull was too strong. His curiosity, his need to uncover the truth, overpowered his fear. He pried at the edges of the wooden panel, his hands slick with sweat as he tried to peel it away. The wood groaned in protest, as if it too were trying to resist what lay beyond. A moment of intense silence passed, and then with a loud crack the panel broke free. The cold air surged forward, flooding the room with an icy wind. Lucas stepped back, his eyes wide as he stared at the dark opening behind the panel. There was something large hidden there just out of sight. He could feel its presence, like a thick weight pressing down on him. His heart raced, and for a moment he hesitated. The rational part of his mind screamed at him to leave, to turn and run. But something else, something deeper, compelled him forward. He took a slow step toward the opening. The shadows within it seemed to move, as though they were alive. The faint scent of incense mixed with the pungent smell of decay, and Lucas couldn't suppress a wave of nausea that washed over him. There, in the darkness, he saw it, a faint glimmer of something metallic, a chain, old and rusted, partially, hidden beneath a layer of dust. He crouched down to get a better look, his pulse thudding in his ears, and then, as his hand brushed against the chain, a sharp, high-pitched sound rang through the room, so loud, so piercing, that it felt like it was tearing through his mind. His vision blurred, and for a moment, the air itself seemed to thicken, becoming dense and suffocating. Then, just as suddenly as it had come, the noise stopped. The room returned to its oppressive silence, but Lucas knew deep down that it wasn't over. Whatever he had uncovered, whatever he had awakened, it was still there, waiting, watching. And now, he was a part of it. He could no longer turn back. Lucas stood frozen, his hand still hovering over the rusted chain hidden in the darkness behind the broken panel. The silence was deafening, suffocating him, pressing in on his chest, making it hard to breathe. His mind raced, heart pounding in his ears. The sharp, high-pitched noise still echoed in the back of his head, a faint memory of something horrifying that had reverberated through the very bones of the convent. He felt the cold seeping deeper into his skin, into his very soul, and the weight of it was almost unbearable. His breath came in shallow gasps, but it was as if the air itself had turned thick, as though it were no longer meant for him. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to leave, to run, to flee from whatever had been awakened in this forsaken place. But the chain was calling to him. The glint of rusted metal in the shadows, half hidden from view, beckoned him closer. It was like the faintest whisper in his mind, urging him to uncover the truth, to discover what had been locked away all these years. But what was the price? Was it worth it? Lucas pulled his hand back slowly, unwilling to touch it again, but his feet betrayed him. They moved without his consent, inching him closer to the opening. His mind was a blur of confusion, fear, and a growing sense of inevitability. He couldn't understand why, but something deep within him was driving him to go further, to understand the secrets buried here, no matter the cost. His eyes darted across the room. The shadows stretched unnaturally, crawling like fingers reaching for him. It felt as though the very walls were alive, watching him. The sense of being observed, of something, someone, hidden in the depths, made his skin crawl. He swallowed hard, but it did little to ease the choking feeling in his throat. The silence hung heavy, broken only by the faint whisper of wind that slipped through the cracks in the walls. He moved closer to the chain again, but before his fingers could touch it, a new sensation washed over him. A sudden rush of dizziness struck him. It was as if the room had tilted, the floor rising up beneath him like the deck of a ship in a storm. He staggered back, reaching for the nearest wall for support. His vision blurred, the edges of the room swimming in a haze of darkness. He could feel his pulse hammering in his chest, the tightness in his throat worsening. The whispers returned. Soft at first, barely perceptible. But then they grew louder, more insistent. "You shouldn't be here. Leave. Leave now, before it sees you." Lucas shook his head, trying to clear the fog in his mind. His legs felt weak, and he stumbled against the cold stone wall, his heart racing. The words didn't make sense. It was just his mind playing tricks on him, wasn't it? The long hours, the isolation, the dread, everything was getting to him, but deep down a part of him knew that it was something more. This wasn't just fear, this wasn't just exhaustion. It was as if the very air around him had been tainted with something ancient, something that had lain dormant for years. And now that it had been disturbed, it was waking up. The air thickened around him, suffocating. His breath came in short, desperate gasps, and he could feel the walls of the room pressing closer, the shadows reaching out, curling around him. He tried to move, to step back, but his body felt paralyzed, heavy, as though the weight of something unseen was pinning him to the spot. It was then that he saw it. From the corner of his eye, a figure emerged from the shadows, its shape indistinct, shrouded in the darkness. It was a woman, or at least it looked like one. Her face was obscured, her form flickering in and out of focus, as if she were made of mist, nothing more than a fragment of memory. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, but the figure remained, silent, its presence alone enough to freeze Lucas in place. His heart hammered in his chest, a violent thudding that threatened to burst from his ribcage. His mouth went dry as the figure stepped closer, its movement slow, deliberate, as though it had all the time in the world. The air grew colder still, the temperature dropping until Lucas could see his breath hanging in the air, each exhale a puff of frost in the dim light. He wanted to scream, to run, but the words wouldn't come. His body refused to move. The figure came closer, the cold around him growing unbearable. And then, in a voice that was not a voice at all, the figure spoke. "I told you, it was waiting for you." The words were not spoken aloud, but were somehow inside his mind, pressing against the very fabric of his thoughts. It wasn't a voice he could hear with his ears, but a presence that surrounded him, a sound that resonated within him deep inside his soul. The figure's form began to flicker again, growing more solid as it neared him, its features becoming clearer. It was a woman, yes, but not just any woman. She wore the habit of a nun, her face pale and drawn, her eyes dark and hollow. The same eyes that had once looked at him from the old journal, the same eyes that had stared at him from the page with desperation, with fear. Sister Mary Magdalene. Lucas's breath caught in his throat. His legs felt like lead, his body unable to move, trapped in the presence of something otherworldly. The whispers grew louder still, but now they weren't just whispers. They were cries, screams, desperate calls for help, their voices mingling with his own thoughts, drowning him in their weight. "It knows you, Lucas. It has always known you." His mind reeled, the words stabbing through him like shards of glass. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The room spun, the shadows closing in around him, and the figure, Sister Mary Magdalene, was so close now, her presence almost suffocating. And then, as quickly as it had appeared, the figure vanished. The room fell into complete silence. The air returned to normal, the oppressive weight lifting, but Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. Whatever had been waiting for him here had only just begun. Lucas stood still in the center of the room, his legs trembling beneath, his mind racing. The figure had vanished just as quickly as it had appeared, but the terror it left behind was palpable. His breath came in ragged gasps, his chest heaving with the force of it. His eyes darted around the room, searching for any sign of movement. But there was nothing, just the oppressive silence and the cold that still clung to his skin like a second layer of flesh. But he knew it wasn't over. It couldn't be. Not after everything he had uncovered, not after what he had felt. There was something ancient and powerful in this place, something that had been waiting for him, watching him. And it was only now that he fully understood. The darkness that had once been confined to whispers and shadows had found its way into him. It had attached itself to him, burrowed deep inside, and now there was no escape. His hands, trembling, reached for the lantern, the flickering flame casting an eerie glow on the walls, making the shadows dance around him like ghosts in the night. Every corner of the room felt like a trap, every movement an invitation for the unseen to close in. He felt its presence all around him, pressing in, suffocating him with its weight. The journal, the one he had found earlier, still lay abandoned. On the floor, its pages now marked by the fear he had tried to ignore. Its words echoed in his mind, each sentence a reminder of the terrible truth he had uncovered. Sister Mary Magdalene hadn't just disappeared. She had been taken by something that lurked in the shadows, something that was still here. With shaky hands, Lucas picked up the journal again, his fingers brushing against the brittle, yellowed pages. He flipped through them, the words blurred by his own panic, but his eyes caught on one passage, one final entry. I feel it coming. For me, it will not be long now. I'm its last victim, but I know it will not stop. It cannot. The darkness has claimed me, and when it has taken me, it will move on to the next. The next is you, Lucas. It always has been. The words hit him like a thunderclap, reverberating through his entire body. His throat tightened, and his mind spun. The next is you, Lucas. How could it know his name? He had never heard of Sister Mary Magdalene before today. He had never even been to this convent until he was hired to work here. But now it all made sense. The pull he felt when he first stepped into the convent, the sense of being watched. It had all been leading him to this moment. The darkness had been waiting for him, and now it had him. He wasn't just a bystander to this story. He was a part of it, a willing participant, drawn in by the same forces that had claimed the others before him. His heart raced in his chest, and his hands clenched into fists as he tried to steady his breathing. He had to move. He had to escape. But the room, the convent, felt alive. The walls seemed to close in on him. The floor beneath him seemed to shift. There was nowhere to run. He was trapped. And then he heard it. A soft sound, barely audible above the pounding of his own heart. A faint scrape, like nails dragging against stone. It was coming from behind him. His breath caught in his throat as he slowly turned, his flashlight casting long, flickering shadows. The cold air grew heavier, the temperature dropping even further, and the room seemed to stretch, as though the walls were pushing in, urging him toward the source of the sound. The lantern trembled in his hand, casting jagged shadows on the wall in front of him. And then through the gloom, he saw it, a figure barely visible at first, emerging from the shadows at the far end of the room. It was her again. Sister Mary Magdalene. But this time she was not a fleeting ghost. She was solid, real, standing in the doorway like a sentinel, her face pale and drawn, her eyes wide and unblinking, dark pools of fear and desperation. She stood motionless, her arms stretched out in front of her, her fingers curled like claws. "Help me," she whispered, her voice barely audible, but it was enough to make Lucas's heart skip a beat. The words were a plea, a cry for help, but they were so distant, so hollow, as though they came from a place far beyond her reach. Her eyes, dark and hollow, locked with his, and for a moment, Lucas felt a wave of compassion for the woman who had once been so devoted to her faith, to her sisters. But the moment quickly passed. Her eyes flickered, and then, without warning, she lunged at him. A scream tore from his throat as he stumbled backward, the lantern falling from his hand and crashing to the floor. The flames sputtered out, plunging him into darkness. He didn't have time to think. His body moved instinctively, his feet carrying him away from her, away from the thing that had once been Sister Mary Magdalene. But no matter how fast he ran, no matter how far he pushed himself, the darkness followed him. It was in the walls. It was in the very air. The whispers were louder now, shrieking, echoing in his ears. The chains he had seen before rattled behind him, as if they were pulling him back, trying to keep him from escaping. He could hear her voice again, faint, desperate. "It's coming for you, Lucas. It always has been. You can't outrun it." The words were a chilling prophecy. And as the darkness closed in around him, Lucas realized that she was right. There was no escape. The darkness swallowed him whole. Lucas could feel the cold creeping into his bones, thickening the air until it became almost unbearable. His breath came in shallow gasps, panic taking hold of him as he stumbled through the pitch-black room. The walls seemed to close in, their cold stone surfaces pressing against him, trapping him in an ever-tightening cage. The whispers, once soft and distant, now roared in his mind, relentless, overwhelming, filled with an urgency that left no room for doubt. "It's coming for you." The voice was no longer just a whisper. It was real, raw, and it echoed inside his head like 1,000 voices crying out in unison. Sister Mary Magdalene's hollow, desperate gaze burned into his mind. He could hear her voice in the silence, echoing her pleas as though they were his own thoughts. "Help me. I need your help." But Lucas was beyond help now. The fear was too much, the terror of being trapped in this God-forsaken place, trapped in the very thing that had devoured the others before him. The question that had been plaguing him since he first arrived, the question that had been whispered in the journal, in the cold rooms, and in the shadows, was now clear. What had happened to Sister Mary Magdalene? As he ran through the darkness, his pulse pounding in his ears, he felt something shift, a presence behind him, closer now. His feet stumbled, and before he could right himself, he was thrown against the cold stone wall. His head collided with the hard surface with a sickening thud, and for a moment everything went black. But the cold never left. He gasped for air, his body trembling from the impact, from the overwhelming presence that seemed to press in on him. Slowly, he pushed himself up, his hand brushing against the stone, his mind spinning. He could still hear her voice, faint but distinct, whispering from the shadows. "You need to understand, Lucas." Her voice now seemed to come from everywhere, as though it was inside the very walls of the convent. It echoed in his skull, growing louder, more frantic. He forced his eyes open, pushing through the haze of dizziness and fear. His vision was blurry, but in the corner of the room, just beyond his reach, he saw it. The altar. It was the same altar that had drawn him in before, the one he had seen earlier covered in dust and cobwebs. But now it was different. The light from his fallen lantern flickered feebly, casting strange shadows across the room, and for a moment it appeared as though the altar itself was moving. The wood was old, weathered by time, but there at the base, just below the surface, was a crack, a deep, jagged line running across the stone floor, as though something had been hidden there, waiting to be unearthed. Lucas's pulse quickened. Something was wrong, something more than just the presence of the missing nun. He moved toward the altar, his legs shaking beneath him as he reached out. His fingers grazed the crack in the stone. Beneath his touch, the stone felt unnaturally cold, even for a place as ancient as this. His heart raced as he knelt down, his hand trembling as he ran his fingers over the edge of the crack. It shifted. The stone slid aside, and Lucas froze. A hidden compartment. Inside there was a small weathered box. The metal lid was rusted, the hinges barely hanging on, as if it hadn't been opened in years. He could feel the weight of it, the sense that this was the final piece of the puzzle, the key to the mystery that had haunted this place for so long. His hands were trembling as he lifted the box, his breath shallow as he opened it. What he found inside made his heart stop. A collection of photographs, faded and yellowed with age. They were of the nuns, Sister Mary Magdalene among them, but the images were distorted, blurred, as though they had been tampered with, as though something had been deliberately hidden. Some of the faces were scratched out, others were barely visible, their features obscured by smudges and streaks of ink. But one photograph, the one on top, was different. It was clear, too clear. It was of Sister Mary Magdalene, but her eyes were wide with terror. Her hands were bound, and her mouth was open in a scream that was not audible, a silent scream. Behind her stood another figure, draped in shadow, their face obscured by the darkness. The figure's hand was placed gently on her shoulder, its fingers long and skeletal. The shadow seemed to wrap around her like a cocoon, consuming her. The photograph was chilling, but what was worse, what froze Lucas to the bone, was the figure. It was unmistakable, the same figure he had seen earlier, the one standing in the doorway, staring at him with hollow eyes. Sister Mary Magdalene had been part of something dark and twisted. She hadn't disappeared. She had been taken, consumed by something ancient. And the convent, this very place, was the source. It was a prison, a place where the souls of the lost were trapped, waiting for the next victim, waiting for Lucas. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. He wasn't here by accident. He had been brought here, drawn into this place for a reason. The darkness had been waiting for him, just as it had waited for Sister Mary Magdalene, and now there was no escape. Lucas's hands shook as he held the photograph, its brittle edges cutting into his fingers. He stared at it in horror, his mind spinning, his heart pounding so loudly in his chest that he could barely hear the frantic whispers that seemed to surround him. The air in the room had grown thick, colder than it had ever been, as if the very walls of the convent were closing in on him. His breath came in shallow gasps, the cold seeping into his bones as though the darkness of the past was seeping into him too. He could still hear her voice, Sister Mary Magdalene, echoing in his mind, her whisper now a shrill cry for help. "Help me, help us all. It's not too late. You have to stop it." The words were raw, desperate. The figure in the photograph, the one who had been lurking in the shadows, was the source of it all. The thing that had haunted this convent for so long. It was not a ghost, not a spirit. It was something far darker, something that had taken the lives of the nuns and perhaps even many more before them. Lucas's mind reeled, and the weight of the realization crushed him. What had he done? He had uncovered the secret, but now the truth was far worse than anything he could have imagined. The darkness that had taken hold of Sister Mary Magdalene was not some isolated event. It had always been here, always lurking beneath the surface, waiting for the next victim to cross its path. The convent had not been a place of refuge or sanctity. It had been a prison, a place where the lost souls were trapped, where the dead had not rested, where the curse of the place had never been broken. And now Lucas was part of it. He was trapped here too. The walls were closing in, suffocating him. He couldn't run. Not anymore. As he dropped the photograph, the feeling of being watched intensified. The cold, oppressive air wrapped around him like a shroud. But this time the whispers were different. They were not just in his mind. They were coming from the walls, from the very foundation of the convent. The sound of scraping, dragging, the faintest moans of pain echoed through the room, growing, louder with each passing second. But then, amidst the horror and the overwhelming fear, a single thought broke through the chaos. A sliver of light. Redemption. It was a word that carried weight, a word that seemed impossible in this place of darkness. But the journal, the photographs, the whispers, they had all led him here. They had brought him face to face with the truth, and now he had a choice. He had uncovered the darkness, but could he confront it? Could he stop it before it consumed him too? The temperature continued to drop, but it wasn't the cold that terrified him anymore. It was the knowledge that the thing in the shadows, the thing that had taken so many lives, was drawing closer. He could feel it, could hear its breath in the silence. But then another realization struck him. A simple truth buried deep within the chaos. He wasn't alone. The room seemed to shift, the shadows breaking apart like a veil being lifted. The sound of footsteps echoed behind him, soft and slow. His breath caught in his throat as he turned, fear flooding his senses. Standing in the doorway was a figure, a woman, her face serene but full of sorrow. Her eyes met his, and for a moment everything else disappeared. The shadows, the whispers, the chilling cold, they all faded into the background. The figure in the doorway was not a ghost. It was Sister Mary Magdalene, but different. She was no longer the terrified, tormented soul trapped in the convent. There was peace in her eyes now. "It's not too late," she whispered, her voice soft yet filled with a quiet strength. "You can end it. You can set us free." Lucas's heart stuttered in his chest. His mind was a whirlwind of disbelief and confusion. How can I set you free?" She stepped forward, her form solidifying, no longer flickering in the shadows. "The curse. It is tied to the very heart of this place, to the altar. You must destroy it. You must destroy the source of its power." The room seemed to grow even colder, and the whispers returned, louder, more frantic. The darkness around them deepened, pressing in on them both. Sister Mary Magdalene held out her hand, and as she did, Lucas saw the marks on her skin, deep, ancient scars that twisted around her arms like dark veins. "You must let go. Let go of your fear. Let go of what you think you know. Only then can you destroy the curse, only then can we be free." Lucas hesitated. He had come this far, uncovered the truth, but the idea of facing the darkness, the thing that had haunted this place for centuries, was almost too much to bear. Could he really confront it? Could he destroy it? The whispers grew louder, more insistent, as if the darkness itself were urging him to act. Sister Mary Magdalene's voice, calm and steady, cut through the chaos. "Trust in the light, Lucas. The light is what will save us. You have the power to end this. You've always had the power." It was then that Lucas understood. The key to his redemption, to their salvation, lay not in the destruction of the convent, not in the physical world. It lay in the soul, in the choice to face the darkness, to let go of the fear, to find the strength to destroy the source of the curse from within. With a deep breath, Lucas closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the darkness press against him. He reached into himself, into the core of his being, and found the spark of light that had always been there, buried beneath the layers of fear and doubt. And with that spark, he let go. The moment Lucas embraced the light within him, the shadows recoiled, as though they could not bear its presence. The air in the room seemed to shift, becoming lighter, more bearable, as if the very walls of the convent were breathing for the first time in years. The oppressive cold lifted, replaced by a warmth that spread through him like a healing balm. He opened his eyes, his breath steady now, though the fear still lingered, hanging in the corners of his mind like a ghost that refused to leave. The figure of Sister Mary Magdalene stood before him, no longer a spirit in torment, but a being of quiet strength, her face serene, her eyes full of peace. Her presence was no longer that of someone trapped in a cycle of suffering, but of someone freed, someone who had transcended the darkness that had once held her captive. "It is over," she whispered, her voice barely audible but filled with a finality that soothed the turbulent storm inside him. "You have set us free." Lucas nodded, slowly, his heart still pounding, but the weight of the curse seemed to have lifted. The suffocating silence that had once haunted this place was now broken by the faintest sound. A soft sigh, a release of something that had been held in the convent's ancient walls for far too long. For the first time, Lucas felt truly present, fully aware, as if the universe itself were unfolding before him, revealing something sacred, something eternal. The walls around him, once so imposing, now seemed softer, less oppressive. The air was warmer, more alive, as though the entire convent had been reborn in the wake of his act of surrender. Sister Mary Magdalene stepped closer, her form glowing, faintly in the dim light, as though the very essence of peace had enveloped her. She reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch gentle but her presence powerful. "You did not just release us," she said, her voice full of gratitude. "You freed yourself as well." Lucas felt the truth of her words settle in his heart. He had faced the darkness not just of the convent but of his own fears, his own doubts. The darkness had been as much within him as it had been within the walls of this place. And in confronting it, he had unlocked something far more powerful than mere survival. The whispers had faded, their frantic cries now nothing more than a distant memory, replaced by an overwhelming sense of stillness, of peace. It was as though the entire convent, from its creaking floors to its crumbling stone walls, had been granted the release it had so desperately needed. The presence of evil that had once lingered here had dissipated, replaced by something sacred, something pure. Lucas looked at Sister Mary Magdalene one last time, and for the first time since he had set foot in the convent, he smiled. It was not a smile of relief or of victory, but one of understanding. He had uncovered the truth, faced the darkness, and in doing so, had found the light that had always been there waiting for him. He closed his eyes, letting the warmth of the moment fill him, and in that moment he knew he was not alone. He had never been alone. A soft light began to emanate from the very walls of the convent, filling the room with a gentle golden glow. It was as though the place itself had been touched by the divine, as though the curse had been broken, and something greater had taken its place. The darkness, once so heavy and suffocating, had been replaced by a profound stillness, a peace that washed over him like the softest rain, cleansing him, renewing him. Sister Mary Magdalene's form began to fade, dissolving into the light, her face now full of quiet joy. Her final words lingered in the air, not as a command, but as a blessing. Darkness tried to bury her, but light never forgot. As her figure vanished, Lucas remained standing in the center of the room, the warmth of the light wrapping around him like a protective embrace. He knew without a doubt that this place, the convent, the darkness, the suffering, was now a part of his past. And it would remain there, locked away where it belonged. The light in the room grew stronger, and the air seemed to hum with the presence of something greater. Lucas didn't need to see the figure of Sister Mary Magdalene anymore. He felt her presence within him, felt the release of the curse, the lifting of the burden that had once bound her. And then, as if it were the natural conclusion to a long and difficult journey, the convent doors opened, flooding the room with light. The old walls, once so full of sorrow and terror, now stood as silent witnesses to the healing that had taken place within their confines. Lucas stepped forward into the light, leaving the darkness behind. As he stepped outside, the sun broke through the clouds, casting a golden hue over the land. The air was fresh, filled with the promise of a new day. The winds had shifted, and for the first time in years, the land felt alive. In the distance, a bird took flight, soaring into the clear sky, and Lucas smiled. He knew that the journey had not been easy, but it had been necessary. And in that moment, as the light bathed the world around him, he understood. Darkness may try to bury you, to bury your soul, but the light will always find a way to set you free. The air felt lighter as Lucas stepped into the daylight, the weight of the past lifting with every step he took. The once oppressive silence of the convent had faded into the soft rustling of the wind and the distant call of birds, as if nature itself had breathed a sigh of relief. The building behind him, though still standing tall, no longer held the same terror. It was as if the very soul of the place had been cleansed, set free from the darkness that had once consumed it. The light seemed different now, brighter, warmer. It wasn't just the sun breaking through the clouds, but something deeper, something spiritual. The world around him felt new, as though it had been washed in the purity of the moment he had just lived. The land, the air, even the sky had a clarity that was absent before. He took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the crisp, fresh air. There was no longer any weight in his chest, no lingering fear or doubt. The darkness that had once threatened to consume him, that had gripped the convent for years, had been replaced by peace. It wasn't a perfect peace, not yet, but it was real, and it was enough. As he looked out over the land, Lucas felt a deep sense of gratitude. He had faced the darkness not only in the convent, but within himself. He had uncovered the truth of the past, the source of the curse, and had set everything right. But more than that, he had found his own light, his own strength. Sister Mary Magdalene's voice echoed softly in his mind, but it was no longer filled with fear. It was filled with peace. "You set us free, Lucas. You set yourself free." He smiled, a quiet, content smile as the wind brushed through his hair. The journey had been long and filled with terror, but it had led him to this moment, and in that moment, he knew that he was no longer bound by the past, no longer weighed down by the fear of the unknown. He was free. The convent stood behind him, a reminder of everything that had been. But ahead of him stretched a new beginning, bathed in light, and Lucas stepped forward with a heart full of hope. And so, as the last remnants of the past faded away, the light remained, unyielding, eternal. It would never forget.